Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It is Tuesday, the 14th of July, here in suburban Chicago, and I am taking a walk in the very warm afternoon. I would say it's mid-80s Fahrenheit with moderate humidity. This is my second attempt at this podcast. I took a walk this morning, recorded the whole thing. It went great, except I didn't actually record the whole thing. I just walked around. Then I got home and realized I hadn't pressed record on my recorder. So zero things recorded for you on that episode. But I'll be trying again right now, and perhaps saying it a second time, I'm going to be even more eloquent than my usual thing. So, before I jump into it, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about today's episode is going to be about some new games I've tried recently, and I have a couple different approaches to that. I have a couple games that I've played recently virtually, asynchronous. And as I've mentioned before, asynchronous play usually takes me a lot longer to get the feel for a game. So I often am not willing to, even my quick thoughts on a game have to be pretty brief until I've played the game a few times. But I've recently tried out Turn-in Taxis, or Turn-in Taxis, which is a, route building and area control game, kind of like Ticket to Ride. In fact, I believe that a lot of people see it as a predecessor to Ticket to Ride, or an inspiration for Alan Moon's famous game. And I tried that on Yukata with a couple listeners. Hello, friends. It went well. I did quite poorly, but I had a good time. And so I'll probably invite them to play another round of it soon and give it another try. It takes place in Germany, but it was interesting. I also recently got to try Downforce, which is a Restoration Games revision or re-release of an older game that is popular. It's a racing game. In this one, you play a owner. Oh, I'm getting barked at. You play an owner-manager of a sort of Formula One race car in a race event. And you buy a car. So at the beginning of the game, there's an auction for the different cars. And you get a hand of cards at the beginning. And then you decide which cars you want to bet on based on the cards you have. And you pay for the car by putting out one of these cards, and whoever pays the most for the car gets it, and then that's the car that they own. You can buy more than one car if you want, but I think everybody has to get one car. I don't recall exactly how it works if you don't get one. I think you do get to a point where you could buy one, and you could choose not to buy one at all, but the way it works, you can't be outbid every time. And then once the game starts, you play cards to move the cars, and each card you have will move one or more of the cars a certain distance, and you have to move it in the order that's drawn on the card, and often then you're moving cars that aren't yours, of course. And part of the idea is you're trying to see which car is going to win, and you want your cars to win. 3 times during the game you place a bet on which car will win, and your bet pays out depending how well the car you bet on finished. You also get a payout if one of your cars finishes in the top half of the race group. Now, I'm the only person who bought 2 cars. I bought a green car and a black car, which finished first and fourth. So my green car finished first, and I think it gave me back enough money in winnings to pay for the 2 cars I bought, but I don't think I got a profit on it. And the black car finished fourth, so it didn't actually pay out at all. I did bet on the green car twice, and so having the green car finish first, or maybe it was the other way around. It was the black car that won, whatever it was. I did bet on it twice, so having it finish first paid out pretty well. Plus I got the payout from winning. And then, so I did end up winning the game. But I didn't really like it all that much. I mean, it was fine. And certainly, if I'm at a game event and somebody gets it out and says, hey, everybody want to play Downforce, I would happily play it. But I think I'm discovering I'm not all that keen on race games. A couple weeks ago, Jonathan Edwards from the Forgot My Dice podcast introduced me to Flamme Rouge in Board Game Arena or in Tabletop Simulator, and that one was, again, fine but not my favorite. And then Downforce, fine but not my favorite. A while back I played Camel Up, not my favorite. I think I just don't like race games very much. Interesting. So anyway, those are a couple new games that I played online. But again, this is the lightest of commentary because I only played them once. And when you play a game online, particularly asynchronously, it's really hard to get a feel for what the game is actually like to play at the table. It's a totally different genre or totally different experience. But that's not why I'm here to talk to you today. What I'm here to talk to you about is Shootin' from the Hip, Double Shot. Today's episode, I'm going to talk about two games that I've played recently on the table, brand new, for the first time, and give you a sense of what they're like. So the first one that I want to talk about is a new game from AEG and designer Josh Wood. This is Santa Monica. Now, my wife and I went downtown to the downtown area of the town we live in. The local bookstore is going out of business, and so they're having a big sale. So we went and had a little mad money to spend, and so I ended up picking up a game from our game store because I like to buy games, and we were going a little nuts. So I ended up getting Santa Monica from AEG. Now, I will say I misread Board Game Geek a little bit. I almost always check Board Game Geek before I buy a game, especially at a game store, especially if it's a game I haven't studied carefully, because I don't, while I don't necessarily say Board Game Geek's ratings are gold, they're often a good litmus test for, is the game good? If the rating is low, the game is good. And what I mean by low is, if a game doesn't have at least a 7, you probably want to research it before you get it. And Santa Monica has a 7.8 on Board Game Geek, but the Geek rating is 6.1, which I don't necessarily need the Geek rating to be above 7 every time, but 6.1 is pretty low, and honestly, I probably wouldn't have bought it if I had clicked through, but they've made the Geek rating harder to see, which is kind of annoying in the new interface. But at 7.8, it looked pretty attractive, and the guy who runs the store was giving it a pretty good pitch. He was saying he really liked it. He's had a lot of success sharing it as a lighter sort of set collection game, good for that 45-minute window. And so it was on that reputation, and frankly the art, it's a really pretty game. So Santa Monica is a game about building a beachfront strip in California, in Santa Monica. In the game, you play a developer. You are buying cards. It is a set collection game mixed with a little bit of tableau building. So you are buying these cards from a market. There's a market of 8 cards, 4 of which are available and 4 of which are available in the front row and 4 of which are in a back row that you can't buy unless you're using a special power. And then when you buy the card either goes along the boardwalk or along the ocean. So what you're doing is you're building 2 rows of cards in front of you, boardwalk and ocean, and putting the cards next to each other. And basically, once you put the cards down, they're stuck. So you're just adding cards on either end of your boardwalk or your ocean front. And the cards always need to be next to another card. So you can extend your ocean or your boardwalk as far as you like, and then add cards in the other row next to those cards. Or you can sort of make your strip even. The way that scoring works, each card has a number of elements on it. When you get the card, you often get a bonus. You get sand dollars, which is the currency of the game. You get locals, which are these little blue meeples. They're sort of extra thin. They look more like people than a sort of standard meeple. There's orange tourists, and then there's green VIPs. And you just get 1 or 2 VIPs at the beginning of the game. And so you actually move the VIP around your town, and they leave these footprint tokens on the spaces that they like. The tourists and the locals, you move them around to get them into spots where they want to go as well. there are a couple other bonuses that you can get when you take cards. And then each card also has a couple little badges on it, or icons, that indicate what kind of card it is. There's an outdoors card. There's a sports card, sports icon. There's a local spot icon, and so on. There's like 5 or 6 different icons that are sort of mixed. Some of the cards have them, and where you put the cards often matters. So some of the cards will score, like you might have a card that scores 3 points if it's next to a tourist spot, or 2 points if it's next to a sports spot, or 5 points if it's next to 2 wave spots, or whatever. So there's a mix of scoring conditions, and so some cards will have scoring conditions on them. Other cards will have the icons that make the scoring happen, but they often then don't have the scoring conditions as well. And then there are some cards that have these activity rings, which is like a ring drawn on the card with something going on. Like there's one of a kite flying. There's one of a bunch of people on a beach reading. There's one that's like a movie theater. And so the ring indicates people that you want to have there at the end of the game. And generally, if you have a number of people equal to what's indicated on the card, then you score the bonus for that card. So for instance, the movie theater says 3 people. If you have 3 people on that card, you score 3 points. One of the things that's interesting is most of these rings, you have to have the exact number. You can't have more on the ring in order to score it. And so the big challenge is that it's relatively easy if you're taking the right cards to end up with a lot of people on your board, but it's actually pretty hard to move them. Moving the people takes a fair amount of effort, and it can be tricky to get enough movement points to move all the people to the rings that you're taking. So it takes a fair amount of thinking to coordinate how many people you're taking and which rings you're taking and so on. The game goes until someone has built 14 cards in their display, and you're generally taking 1 a turn, so the game is usually about 14 turns. Although there are these special activation cards that come out that you can pay to use. Some of those let you take 2 cards. So you could have a game where, I think the first game we played, I ended up with 12 cards in my city, and my wife had 14. She took the take 2 cards action twice. All in all, it's a very pretty game. The art has a slight, it's all illustrations, and it's very clean drawings. It reminds me a little bit of the artist Chris Ware, although not quite as rigid. His drawing is something I'd call architectural, and it's not quite like that, but it is very pretty. The components are all really nice. I had heard that AEG announced last year that they were going to be scaling back, and instead of publishing like 8 or 10 games a year, they were scaling back and just publishing a couple a year, but making them really, really nice. And this definitely fits that approach. I think it's a great game it's a great gateway game. It's pretty light, but there's a lot of really interesting decisions there. Lots to think about. Plays really quick. We've played 2 games and each one was about 45 minutes. I could see it going a little bit faster, but not too much, because there is a fair amount to think about as the game moves on. Lots of different scoring conditions mean it's interesting every time. A big enough market that you feel like you have good choices. Really not much way to screw with the other players except take the card that they wanted. And, so overall, Santa Monica, so far, it's a great game. I don't see us... I wouldn't put it on the absolutely must-buy. There are other better tableau builders. But if this game fits up your alley, it's definitely worth taking a look at. And definitely will be something that we will take when we go play games with other people who aren't as serious gamers. Because it's pretty light, very approachable, and pretty easy to understand. And pretty fun. So that's Santa Monica from AEG. The designer is Josh Wood. I don't have the name of the artist off the top of my head. So the other game I wanted to shoot from the hip about today is the Eagle Gryphon Games game from designer Vital Lacerda and graphic designer Ian O'Toole, and this is On Mars. On Mars was a big Kickstarter. It came out a couple years ago. I think they delivered it last year sometime. I did not back it, but my buddy Paul did, and he brought it over for us to play. He and I and my daughter played it, and it was great. I will say this is an extremely heavy game. Definitely goes in, if I'm making a list of all the heavy games I've played and putting them in order, it's definitely in the top 10 heaviest games I've played. If you recall the 3-episode series I did on depth versus complexity, I kind of made a chart of 9 boxes, and the lower right corner was heavy depth, heavy complexity, or the upper left corner, and that's where this game lies, in the heavy depth, heavy complexity. There's a ton going on, lots and lots of choices, lots of different rules and mini systems to keep track of, lots of interconnected and interdependent resources and concepts. Really big congratulations to Paul Grogan for his gaming rules video, which taught the game pretty well. I had to watch it twice, not because of anything he did wrong, but just there's so much going on that to really get the hang of the game took a lot of prep. That said, my daughter was able to pick it up pretty easily just from us kind of half explaining it as we're getting ready to play, because she didn't want to watch the video. So we said, I don't think we want to do a whole teach, but we'll talk through it we'll kind of talk our way through it, and you can kind of get the hang as you go. But we still spent about a half an hour talking about how to play before we started. And then on our first play, we were constantly looking in the rule book. So, like I said, among the heaviest games I've played. But let's set that aside. So the theme is you are in the first colony of Mars. We have built a space station around Mars that's constantly being resupplied by Earth, and you are helping to develop that colony. So each player represents a different group of these developing people. I don't know if you're a company or what organizational situation you're in, but you have your own set of workers, your own set of advanced buildings you're making. But because it's this colony, you're all interdependent on one another. The game has 2 sections. There's the space station section and then the Mars colony section. And you have a main figure that indicates where your actions are taking place. So you can either be in the space station, which allows you to get new supplies that have been delivered from Earth. It allows you to get technology blueprints from Earth and a variety of other things. And then on the Mars side, you can build new structures, and you can do exploring the surface to learn things. You can develop your resources and so on. There's a couple of really interesting elements to the game. Like I said, there's all these interconnected resources. There's like 5 different resources you have to keep track of. 6, I guess, if you count so there's 5 resources. There's these gems, and then you have these workers. Each resource you have to kind of keep track of and pay attention to how many you have. And, like a lot of these games, you really have to manipulate keep track of how many of each thing you have and really think about it and sort of plan ahead so that you have the right number of resources in the right time. At the beginning of the game, you take one action per turn plus 1 sort of bonus action. You have these main actions and then these bonus actions. And as the game goes along, more and more bonus actions become available. And so as a player, you're able to leverage your game until I really felt like at the end of the game, the bonus actions were more important than the main actions for me. That the main actions were useful, but then often the bonus action would be as good or better. Being able to do that or being ready to do that is good. Another thing that is unique about this game or really interesting is the idea of shared technology. So there's these technology trees and these technology things that you research and acquire. And the way the game works is when you get them, they go into your technology tree. But everyone has access to that technology. So, for instance, there are these buggies that you use to explore the surface of Mars and get resources and research and such. Early on, they can only move 2 spaces. So I got the research technology that lets them move more than 2 spaces. And I amped that up so that I could use my buggy to drive around and get stuff more easily. But then, so could everyone else. So once I had at the point where you could drive 5 spaces with the buggies, then everyone else could also drive 5 spaces with their buggies. But every time someone else used that technology, I get a resource. So, and that's true of all the research, all the things they were doing too. So there's a big element of keeping track of what everybody else is doing and drawing from them. Because I don't have to, when you use someone else's technology, you don't pay them the resource. It comes out of the bank. So it doesn't cost you extra to use one of theirs, but it does benefit them. You also have these robots that have to be in a certain place whenever you're building a thing. And then, of course, there's points everywhere, and you get points for all kinds of stuff. I've just scratched the surface. Like I said, it's an incredibly deep game. But it was incredibly fun. I really enjoyed it. This had exactly the feeling, if you go to my top 100, my top 50 lists, or when I talk about games that I like, or go back to the very early episodes of the podcast, I talk about that feeling of not quite enough. Is my favorite thing in games. When you're playing a game and you get an idea and you have a thing you want to do, and then, there's just not quite enough to do it, and you want to figure out how to manipulate things and move things around so that you can have enough to do that one thing. This game has that in spades, and in fact, all 3 players had at least one turn each where we managed to line up all of the things right in a row so that we got to do a super turn where we did a thing and that got us a bonus that gave us something else. In that way, this game reminded me of Trismegistus, which is a game I talked about a little bit. I got it, I think I got it in January. That's another fairly heavy game where you have a lot of different interacting systems, and the payoff in the game comes from combining the different elements in a way that they trigger off one another, so you get one thing and then you get another, which actually reminds me a little bit of like Russian Railroads or First Class, which are a couple games I'm playing asynchronously online. Both of those also have this element where every now and again you'll get a turn that you do a thing and it gets you another thing, it gets you a couple more things, and then you can do another thing because you did those things. That's really satisfying. It makes you feel very smart to hit one of those moments. And on Mars feels really good to do that. The graphic design is great, really easy to read once you kind of understand the way it's laid out, especially for a game that's so complicated. The little meeples are cool, the advanced buildings and so on. It's all lovely, easy to play with and fun. So overall, I really like this game. Definitely a game I want to play again. In fact, we sort of made an agreement we would try to play it again within a couple weeks, because it's the sort of game where if you go very long without playing it, you'll forget everything. You'll have to relearn it, and it's such a pain to learn that it's really nice to get a game like that played again soon. So that's a big part of our plan going forward with regard to that game. I don't see this being a game I would buy, in part because, as you know, I generally try not to buy games that I already have in my gaming group. If I have access to the game, I don't generally buy it, because then I'm just, either my copy's not getting played or theirs isn't. So it's nice to buy stuff that's not in the system. So since Paul has it, it is a game I would certainly want to play with him. Or even if I wanted to play it at a time when he couldn't be there, I'm sure he would loan it to me. That said, this definitely reinforces the idea that I need to play some other Vital Lacerda games. I've certainly heard from other people that other games of his are definitely things I would enjoy. I have to say the theme on most of them is really a turnoff for me. I have no interest in playing The Gallerist. I have no interest in playing Vinhos, because the theme's just, I don't want to do that. I will say Escape Plan sounds fun, but it doesn't sound like the kind of game that really tickles my fancy. And Lisboa sounds neat, but I haven't had a chance to play that one. I will say the theme for that one isn't all that amazing either, but it is a cool idea. So, On Mars, having only played it once, excellent game. Definitely recommend giving it a try if you get a chance and you like heavy games like this. I know I'll be playing it again sometime soon, I hope. Preferably a couple times within the next couple months to really get those rules solid in my brain. So excellent. So that's my Shootin' from the Hip double shot. Again, as a reminder, if this is your first listening, these are games I've played once or twice. Santa Monica 3 times, I believe, and on Mars once. So this is not a formal review. I haven't played the game nearly enough to be able to be authoritative or definitive on the experience of it. But I like to give my initial feelings on having played a game. So, reader, what do you think of either of these games? Have you played them? What else have you been playing lately? I'd love to hear from you. One last thing before I go. I was recently on the podcast Flip Flory's Board Game Serial, which is a podcast kind of about the culture of Saturday morning cartoons and board games. Flip Flory, of course, being the resident clown and a member of the Flip the Table podcast, the much beloved and now defunct Flip the Table podcast. So I was a guest on episode 96, Wolfing Out. So I encourage you to go check that out if you want to hear a little bit more from yours truly. Well, that's about it, my time for today. Thanks for joining me. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Talk to you later. Bye-bye. The first one I want to talk about is what is it? I can't remember. I know the second one. What the heck? Oh, okay.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.